Hi, I'm Catherine. The sight of my wedding dress being used as a weapon still makes me physically sick. One moment, I was grieving my third miscarriage while my sister Jessica offered hollow condolences, and the next, she was standing in my living room wearing my bridal gown, claiming she wanted to, quote, show me what a real woman looks like. Jessica thought she could break my spirit by mocking my inability to carry children. She had no idea that my husband, FBI Director Michael Thompson. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Would walk through our front door and quietly show his federal badge before making it clear that terrorizing FBI families comes with consequences she never imagined. My name is Catherine Thompson, and 6 months ago I thought I had finally found peace with the family I'd chosen over the one I was born into. I was 32, a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime cases, married to FBI Director Michael Thompson, living in a beautiful colonial house in McLean, Virginia, that we'd bought with dreams of filling it with children's laughter. Michael and I had met during a joint FBI Justice Department task force investigating political corruption in Chicago. He was a seasoned agent with an impeccable reputation for integrity and results, while I was the ambitious prosecutor who'd built a career dismantling criminal enterprises that thought they were untouchable. Our partnership was professional first, then personal, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice. Our wedding 3 years earlier had been a small, elegant affair at the historic Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., attended by colleagues from federal law enforcement and Michael's close-knit family from Ohio. My own family's attendance had been sporadic and complicated, marked by the kind of drama that had characterized my relationship with them since childhood. Jessica, my older sister by 4 years, had served as my maid of honor despite our difficult history. She was a successful real estate agent in Baltimore, unmarried by choice, and had always viewed my academic and professional achievements with a mixture of resentment and competitive envy. During the wedding planning, she'd made subtle comments about my dress choice, my venue selection, and my decision to prioritize career over starting a family immediately. You know, Catherine, most women your age are already mothers, she'd said during my final dress fitting. But I suppose federal prosecutors don't have time for biological clocks. I dismissed her comments as typical Jessica jealousy, the same pattern of undermining that had marked our childhood. She had always needed to diminish my accomplishments to maintain her own sense of superiority, and I'd learned to ignore her barbs rather than engage in conflicts that never resolved anything. But marriage to Michael had given me something Jessica couldn't attack: genuine happiness, professional fulfillment, and the security of being loved unconditionally by someone who understood and respected my ambitions. For the first time in my life, I felt insulated from her psychological manipulation by the strength of my chosen family. That security began cracking 18 months ago, when we started trying to conceive. Michael and I approached parenthood with the same methodical planning we brought to our careers, consulting fertility specialists, maintaining healthy lifestyles, and creating the kind of stable home environment we wanted for our future children. The first miscarriage at 8 weeks had been devastating but not uncommon, according to our obstetrician. We grieved privately, supporting each other through the loss while maintaining hope that the next pregnancy would be successful. The second miscarriage at 12 weeks had been harder, requiring medical intervention and weeks of recovery that tested our resilience and faith in our ability to become parents. The third miscarriage, just 2 weeks ago at 14 weeks, had shattered something fundamental in both of us. We'd heard the heartbeat, seen the ultrasound images, begun discussing nursery plans and parental leave schedules. Losing that pregnancy felt like losing an actual child rather than just potential, and the grief was overwhelming in its intensity and permanence. Jessica arrived at our McLean home 3 days after my third miscarriage, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the kind of sympathetic expression that never quite reached her eyes. She moved through our living room with the predatory grace of someone surveying territory for potential vulnerabilities, her gaze lingering on the baby books we hadn't yet found the strength to put away. "Catherine, you look absolutely exhausted," she said, settling into our cream-colored armchair with proprietary comfort. "This fertility struggle is clearly taking a serious toll on your appearance and mental health." I was curled on the sofa in Michael's FBI Academy sweatshirt, surrounded by the kind of grief literature that well-meaning friends had recommended, but that felt inadequate to address the specific pain of recurrent pregnancy loss. "I'm processing the loss, Jess. It's only been 3 days." Jessica set down her perfectly arranged sympathy casserole and studied me with the clinical detachment of someone conducting psychological evaluation. "3 miscarriages, Catherine. At some point you have to face the possibility that your body simply isn't designed for motherhood." The words hit like physical blows, delivered with the casual cruelty that Jessica had perfected over decades of sibling rivalry. She had an uncanny ability to identify exactly where someone felt most vulnerable, and then press those wounds with surgical precision. "My doctors say there's no medical reason why I can't carry a pregnancy to term," I said carefully, though Jessica's certainty was making me doubt my own physician's reassurances. "Doctors say a lot of things to avoid difficult conversations," Jessica replied, opening her designer handbag and pulling out what appeared to be printed articles from medical journals. "I've been researching recurrent pregnancy loss, and the statistics are quite clear about success rates after multiple failures." She slid the articles across our coffee table, highlighting sections about maternal age, stress factors, and the psychological impact of repeated miscarriages. The research was legitimate but carefully selected to present the most discouraging possible interpretation of my situation. "Furthermore," Jessica continued, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when selling high-end real estate to reluctant buyers, "I think you need to consider how this fertility obsession is affecting Michael's career. FBI directors need wives who can handle social obligations and public appearances, not women who are constantly dealing with medical crises." The attack on my marriage was expertly crafted, designed to make me question not just my fertility but my value as a federal law enforcement spouse. Jessica understood that my professional identity was deeply intertwined with Michael's career, and she was suggesting that my personal struggles were becoming professional liabilities. "Michael has been incredibly supportive," I said, though Jessica's words were planting seeds of doubt about whether my grief was becoming burdensome for someone in his position. Jessica's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Of course he's supportive publicly, but Catherine, think about the practical implications. FBI director wives are expected to host events, attend functions, present a certain image of stability and success. How does that work when you're constantly dealing with pregnancy losses and medical appointments?" She stood and moved to our mantelpiece, studying the photographs of Michael's swearing-in ceremony, our wedding reception, and various federal law enforcement events, where I'd stood beside him in evening gowns and professional attire. "Look at these pictures, Catherine. Look at yourself then versus now. The stress is aging you prematurely, and frankly, it shows. Michael deserves a wife who enhances his professional image, rather than detracting from it." The psychological warfare was masterfully executed, attacking my self-worth from multiple angles while maintaining plausible deniability about malicious intent. Jessica could claim she was offering tough love and practical advice rather than deliberately undermining my confidence during the most vulnerable period of my life. The confrontation escalated during Jessica's second visit, when her subtle psychological attacks transformed into direct challenges to my marriage and my right to grieve my lost pregnancies. She had arrived uninvited with groceries. She claimed I was too depressed to shop for myself, moving through my kitchen with the efficiency of someone taking inventory of weaknesses to exploit. "Catherine, we need to have an honest conversation about your future," Jessica announced, unpacking organic vegetables and expensive supplements with theatrical concern. 3 miscarriages in 18 months isn't just bad luck, it's your body telling you something important about your limitations. I was sitting at our kitchen island, trying to review case files for an organized crime prosecution that couldn't wait for my grief to resolve. Work had become my anchor, the one area of life where I still felt competent and valuable despite my apparent failure at the fundamental female task of reproduction. "My reproductive endocrinologist says my hormone levels are normal, and there's no structural reason for the losses," I said, though Jessica's persistent questioning was making me doubt even my specialist's expertise. Jessica paused in her grocery organizing, fixing me with the pitying expression she reserved for people she considered fundamentally deluded. "Catherine, you're 32 years old, married to one of the most powerful men in federal law enforcement, and you're spending your prime years chasing a biological function that's clearly not meant to happen." She moved closer, her voice taking on the intimate tone she used when delivering her most devastating observations. "Meanwhile, other women are building families, supporting their husbands' careers, and creating the kind of stable home environment that federal leadership requires. The comparison was always lurking beneath Jessica's concern, the suggestion that other women were succeeding where I was failing, that my inability to carry pregnancies to term reflected some deeper inadequacy that affected every area of my life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Michael and I are considering fertility treatments, I said, though the conversation felt increasingly like defending a position that Jessica had already declared indefensible. Fertility treatments? Jessica's eyebrows rose in theatrical concern. Catherine, do you understand how expensive and emotionally demanding those procedures are? How they affect marriages, careers, and mental health? You're already struggling with depression and anxiety from 3 natural losses. She pulled out her phone and showed me articles about IVF failure rates, the psychological impact of assisted reproduction, and divorce statistics among couples undergoing fertility treatments. The research was selectively curated to present the most discouraging possible outlook for our situation. Furthermore, Jessica continued, settling into the breakfast nook where Michael and I shared morning coffee and evening conversations about our cases, I think you need to consider how this fertility obsession is affecting your professional performance. When was the last time you felt genuinely excited about a prosecution? When did you last feel confident in court? The question struck at fears I'd been trying to suppress. My grief was affecting my concentration, my energy, my ability to engage with complex legal challenges that had once energized me. Jessica was identifying real struggles and reframing them as evidence that my priorities were fundamentally misguided. I'm processing a significant loss, I said weakly. It's normal for grief to affect work performance temporarily. Jessica's smile was predatory, suggesting she'd identified exactly the vulnerability she'd been seeking. Temporarily? Catherine, you've been processing fertility issues for over a year. At what point does temporary grief become chronic dysfunction that affects everyone around you? She stood and moved to our refrigerator, studying the ultrasound photos I hadn't yet found the strength to remove, the appointment cards for specialists, the prescription bottles for prenatal vitamins that now felt like monuments to failure. Look at this, Catherine. Your entire identity has become defined by pregnancy loss rather than professional achievement or marital success. Is this really the woman Michael married? The desecration of my wedding dress happened on November 3rd at exactly 2:15 p.m., a moment forever burned into my memory with the precision of trauma. I had been upstairs in our bedroom, finally finding the courage to pack away the baby clothes we'd optimistically purchased after hearing the 3rd pregnancy's heartbeat, when I heard Jessica moving around downstairs with purposeful determination. "Catherine, come down here," she called from our living room, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, excitement mixed with something that sounded dangerously close to triumph. "I want to show you something important." I descended our hardwood stairs slowly, my arms full of tiny onesies and receiving blankets that would now go into storage indefinitely. The physical act of putting away these symbols of hope felt like conducting a funeral for dreams I couldn't bear to abandon completely. When I reached our living room, Jessica was standing in the center of the space wearing my wedding dress. My breath caught in my throat as I processed what I was seeing. The ivory silk gown that had made me feel like a princess on the happiest day of my life was now draped across Jessica's slightly larger frame, the delicate beadwork catching afternoon sunlight streaming through our bay windows. She had somehow accessed our bedroom closet, found the carefully preserved dress in its garment bag, and put it on while I was occupied with packing away baby items. "Jessica, what are you doing?" I whispered, setting down the baby clothes with trembling hands. She turned slowly, modeling the dress with theatrical grace, her movements deliberate and predatory. "I wanted to show you what a real woman looks like in wedding white, Catherine, someone who actually deserves to wear a bridal gown." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. Jessica had chosen the moment when I was most vulnerable, most consumed with grief over my inability to create life, to demonstrate her own fertility and femininity by wearing the symbol of my marriage and happiness. "Take it off," I said, my voice barely audible. "That dress is sacred to me. It represents the best day of my life." Jessica smoothed the silk skirt with possessive hands, studying herself in the mirror above our fireplace. "Does it, though? Or does it represent promises you can't keep? Vows about creating a family that you're clearly incapable of fulfilling?" She moved closer, and I could see that she had also applied makeup and styled her hair, transforming herself into a grotesque parody of my wedding day appearance. The effort she'd invested in this performance suggested planning, preparation, a calculated desire to inflict maximum psychological damage. "You know what this dress should represent?" Jessica continued, her voice taking on the sharp edge I recognized from childhood arguments. "It should represent a woman who can give her husband children, who can fulfill the basic biological purpose that makes marriage meaningful." I stared at my sister wearing my wedding dress while mocking my miscarriages, and something fundamental broke inside me. This wasn't sibling rivalry or competitive jealousy. This was deliberate psychological torture designed to destroy what remained of my self-worth and sense of identity as a woman and wife. "Jessica, you need to take off my dress and leave my house immediately." "Or what?" she laughed, spinning in the silk skirt like a demented bride. "You'll call Michael? Tell him his wife is being mean to you? Catherine, you're a federal prosecutor who can't handle basic family conflict. How pathetic is that?" She posed in front of our wedding photographs, creating a visual comparison between the happy bride I'd been and the grieving, broken woman I'd become. "This is what Michael deserves," Jessica said, gesturing to herself in my dress. "A woman who can actually fulfill the promises made in wedding vows." The phone call from FBI Assistant Director Patricia Walsh came while Jessica was still parading around our living room in my wedding dress, taking photographs of herself with my phone to document her psychological assault. Agent Walsh's voice was professional but carried an undertone that made my grief-clouded mind snap to attention. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you about some concerning communications we've intercepted. Your sister has been making inquiries about your husband's position and your family's security protocols." My blood turned to ice as I watched Jessica continue her grotesque performance, now posing with our wedding album while wearing my sacred dress. "What kind of inquiries?" "She contacted multiple federal agencies claiming to be conducting background research on FBI director families for a real estate development project. She's been asking about residential security, travel schedules, and vulnerability assessments." I stared at Jessica, who is now live streaming herself on social media wearing my wedding dress, captioning the video with commentary about showing my infertile sister what a real woman looks like. The cruelty wasn't just personal anymore. It was becoming public humiliation designed to damage both my reputation and Michael's professional standing. "Agent Walsh, she's in my house right now wearing my wedding dress and posting it online to mock my miscarriages." The silence that followed was profound. When Agent Walsh spoke again, her voice carried the kind of controlled anger that suggested Jessica had just escalated from family cruelty into federal security concerns. "Mrs. Thompson, we've been monitoring your sister's activities for several weeks. Her inquiries about FBI families raised red flags in our counterintelligence division. What you're describing sounds like psychological warfare designed to destabilize a federal law enforcement family." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with notifications from Jessica's social media posts. She had tagged me in videos showing her wearing my wedding dress, with captions like, "Teaching my barren sister what fertility looks like," and "Some women are born to be wives and mothers, others are just pretending." The posts were going viral, shared by people who didn't understand the context but found the family drama entertaining. Jessica was turning my most private grief into public spectacle, using social media to amplify her psychological assault beyond the confines of our home. "There's something else," Agent Walsh continued. "Your sister has been in contact with several organized crime figures you've prosecuted. She's been asking questions about your cases, your methods, and potential vulnerabilities in federal witness protection protocols." The revelation hit like lightning. Jessica wasn't just attacking me personally. She was potentially compromising federal investigations and endangered lives of witnesses I'd helped relocate. Her access to our home, our conversations, and my work materials had given her information that could be sold to criminal organizations seeking revenge against federal prosecutors. "Agent Walsh, how long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months, possibly longer. We believe your sister has been systematically gathering intelligence about your family, your cases, and federal law enforcement procedures. Her real estate career provided perfect cover for asking detailed questions about security and residential patterns." I watched Jessica continue her performance in my wedding dress, now understanding that every visit, every cruel comment, Every moment of psychological manipulation had been part of a larger intelligence-gathering operation. She hadn't just been tormenting me for personal satisfaction. She'd been collecting information that could be used against federal law enforcement families. Mrs. Thompson, Director Thompson is being briefed on this situation as we speak. He's en route to your location with a federal response team. For your safety, I need you to stay on this line and avoid confronting your sister directly. Jessica had finally gone too far, transforming family cruelty into potential treason, personal attacks into federal crimes that would bring the full weight of law enforcement down on her head. The situation spiraled beyond family conflict into federal crisis when Jessica's social media posts began attracting attention from criminal organizations I'd prosecuted as a federal prosecutor. My phone was buzzing continuously with notifications as her videos wearing my wedding dress went viral, accompanied by increasingly vicious commentary about my inability to carry pregnancies and my fitness as an FBI director's wife. "Catherine, look at all this support I'm getting," Jessica said, still wearing my dress while scrolling through hundreds of comments on her live stream. "People understand that some women are just naturally better suited for marriage and motherhood." I was still on the phone with Agent Walsh, following her instructions to remain calm while federal response teams coordinated their approach. But Jessica's social media assault was expanding in real time, drawing followers who seemed to enjoy watching what they perceived as family drama, rather than understanding they were witnessing psychological torture. "The comments are getting more specific," I told Agent Walsh quietly. "People are posting about our address, Michael's schedule, details about federal law enforcement that shouldn't be public knowledge." Jessica had weaponized social media to broadcast not just her cruelty but potentially classified information about FBI operations, using her access to our home and conversations to expose security vulnerabilities that could endanger federal agents and their families. Furthermore, Agent Walsh said, her voice carrying new urgency, "Our cybersecurity team has identified bot networks amplifying your sister's posts. This isn't organic social media engagement. Someone is paying to spread this content to maximum audiences." The implications were staggering. Jessica's attack on me had attracted the attention of criminal organizations sophisticated enough to manipulate social media algorithms, suggesting her intelligence gathering had been part of a larger operation targeting federal law enforcement families. My doorbell rang, and through our security system I could see news reporters gathering on our front lawn. Jessica's viral videos had attracted media attention, turning our private grief into public spectacle that would damage both my reputation and Michael's ability to lead the FBI effectively. "Don't answer the door," Agent Walsh instructed. "Media attention complicates our response options and could interfere with the operation currently underway." Jessica noticed the reporters and seemed energized by their presence, moving closer to our front windows while still wearing my wedding dress. "Look, Catherine, even the news wants to hear about how fertility fraud works in federal families." She was enjoying the chaos she'd created, the transformation of private family cruelty into public humiliation that would follow us for years. Every federal law enforcement event, every professional appearance, every social interaction would now be colored by viral videos of my sister mocking my miscarriages while wearing my wedding dress. "There's something else you need to know," Agent Walsh said carefully. "Your sister has been in contact with a foreign intelligence service." The inquiries about FBI families weren't just criminal opportunism, they were part of a systematic effort to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in federal law enforcement leadership. The revelation transformed everything I thought I knew about Jessica's motivations. This wasn't just sibling rivalry escalated into cruelty. It was espionage using family relationships to gather intelligence about American law enforcement capabilities and weaknesses. She's been photographing everything during her visits, I realized, watching Jessica continue her performance while reporters gathered outside. Our home security, Michael's office setup, documents, schedules, conversations about cases. "We know," Agent Walsh said grimly. "Director Thompson is 3 minutes out with a full federal response team. Mrs. Thompson, your sister isn't just attacking your family anymore. She's committing treason, and the consequences will reflect that level of severity." Through our security cameras, I could see black SUVs approaching our neighborhood with the speed and precision of federal law enforcement operations. The cavalry arrived in the form of Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the FBI's chief psychologist, who called while federal agents were positioning around our neighborhood. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who specialized in protecting law enforcement families from psychological warfare and domestic threats. Mrs. Thompson, I've been monitoring your sister's social media activity as part of our counterintelligence assessment. What she's doing isn't just family cruelty. It's a documented form of psychological warfare used to destabilize federal law enforcement personnel. Relief flooded through me as I realized that professionals who understood manipulation tactics were taking Jessica's behavior seriously rather than dismissing it as family drama. Dr. Martinez, she's still in my house wearing my wedding dress and live streaming herself, mocking my miscarriages. That level of calculated cruelty suggests training or coaching in psychological operations. Mrs. Thompson, we have evidence that your sister has been receiving instruction from foreign intelligence services on how to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities in federal families. Before I could process the full implications, my phone buzzed with a call from an unexpected source. Judge Patricia Reynolds, the federal judge who had overseen several of my organized crime prosecutions. Her voice carried urgent concern that suggested Jessica's actions had attracted attention from the highest levels of federal justice. Catherine, I've been monitoring the social media situation involving your family. This goes far beyond personal attacks. It's systematic harassment designed to compromise your effectiveness as a federal prosecutor. Judge Reynolds explained that other federal prosecutors had reported similar targeting from family members who seemed to have inside knowledge about cases, security protocols, and personal vulnerabilities that suggested coordinated intelligence gathering. We believe your sister is part of a broader operation to identify and neutralize effective federal prosecutors by using family relationships to gather intelligence and create psychological pressure, Judge Reynolds continued. Catherine, you're not just being personally attacked, you're being professionally targeted. The validation was overwhelming. For months, I'd been wondering if I was overreacting to Jessica's cruelty, if grief from my miscarriages was making me paranoid about normal family conflict. Now federal authorities were confirming that my instincts had been correct. Agent Walsh's voice came back on the line with updates that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, our cyber team has traced the bot networks amplifying your sister's content to servers linked with organized crime figures you've successfully prosecuted. They're using her psychological attack on you to damage your reputation and credibility as a federal prosecutor. The scope of the operation was becoming clear. Jessica's access to our home and family information had made her valuable to criminal organizations seeking revenge against prosecutors who had dismantled their operations. Her cruelty wasn't just personal satisfaction. It was intelligence work with financial compensation from enemies of federal law enforcement. There's more, Agent Walsh continued. Your sister's real estate business has been a front for money laundering operations connected to 3 different criminal organizations. She's been using property transactions to clean money while gathering intelligence about federal law enforcement families living in high-security neighborhoods. Through our security system, I could see federal agents moving into position around our house, their coordinated movements suggesting a major operation rather than simple domestic dispute resolution. Jessica, still wearing my wedding dress, seemed oblivious to the federal response team surrounding our property. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Martinez said, Director Thompson will be entering your home in 60 seconds with sufficient authority to end this situation permanently. Your sister's targeting of FBI families ends today. For the first time since Jessica had put on my wedding dress, I felt something stronger than grief and humiliation. I felt the power of institutional protection, the weight of federal authority mobilizing to defend one of their own families from systematic attack. Michael walked through our front door at exactly 3:47 p.m., flanked by Agent Walsh and 2 federal marshals, carrying himself with the controlled authority of someone who had just learned that his family was under attack by a foreign intelligence operation. He wore his FBI Director credentials prominently displayed, sending an immediate message that this was federal business rather than domestic dispute resolution. Jessica was still wearing my wedding dress when she turned to greet him, her expression shifting from triumphant cruelty to confusion as she registered the official nature of his arrival and the federal agents behind him. Michael, perfect timing, Jessica said, smoothing the silk skirt with possessive hands. I was just showing Catherine what a real woman looks like in wedding white, someone who can actually fulfill the promises made in marriage vows. Michael's expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him, controlled fury mixed with the kind of professional focus he brought to counterterrorism operations. He reached into his jacket and withdrew his FBI Director badge, holding it at eye level with deliberate precision. "Jessica Chen," he said formally, his voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement, "you are under arrest for espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, and violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." The transformation in Jessica's demeanor was immediate and complete. The confident, cruel woman who had been tormenting me while wearing my wedding dress suddenly looked smaller, vulnerable, as she realized the scope of the federal response she had triggered. "Michael, you're overreacting to family drama," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is just sisterly advice about Catherine's fertility problems and marriage difficulties." Agent Walsh stepped forward with official documents that suggested weeks of investigation and evidence gathering. "Miss Chen, we have recorded conversations between you and foreign intelligence operatives, financial records showing payments for information about FBI families, and digital evidence of your systematic intelligence gathering activities." Jessica's face went pale as she realized that her months of what she thought was private family manipulation had been under federal surveillance. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a real estate agent trying to help my sister through a difficult time." Michael moved closer, his badge still displayed prominently. "Jessica, you contacted organized crime figures that my wife prosecuted, asking for information about federal witness protection protocols. You photographed classified documents in our home office. You've been live streaming intelligence about FBI family security procedures to social media platforms monitored by foreign adversaries." The evidence was overwhelming, and Jessica's carefully constructed facade of concerned family member was crumbling under the weight of federal investigation. She looked around our living room as if seeing it clearly for the first time, realizing that her access to our home had been a counterintelligence vulnerability rather than family privilege. "Furthermore," Agent Walsh continued, consulting her official files, "your real estate business has been laundering money for 3 criminal organizations while using property transactions to map residential patterns of federal law enforcement families." Jessica tried one final manipulation, appealing to family relationships even as federal agents moved to arrest her. "Catherine, tell them this is just family conflict. Tell them you're overreacting because of postpartum depression and grief over your miscarriages." But I was done being manipulated, done allowing Jessica to use my vulnerabilities as weapons against both my family and federal law enforcement. "Jessica, you committed treason. You used my grief to gather intelligence for enemies of the United States." Michael's voice cut through her protests with absolute finality. "Jessica Chen, you systematically targeted an FBI director's family for foreign intelligence services. That's not family drama, that's an act of war against the United States government." The federal courthouse hearing was held in a secure courtroom typically reserved for terrorism cases, with Jessica seated at the defendant's table, still wearing the orange jumpsuit that had replaced my wedding dress as her costume of choice. The judge, the Honorable David Martinez, presided over proceedings that felt more like a national security briefing than a family court session, surrounded by FBI agents and federal prosecutors who treated Jessica's case as a matter of homeland security. Jessica's court-appointed attorney, a overwhelmed public defender named Sarah Kim, sat beside her client with the expression of someone who understood they were defending against evidence that could result in life imprisonment for treason. The gallery was filled with federal law enforcement officials and counterintelligence specialists who had come to witness the conclusion of an operation that had exposed systematic targeting of FBI families. "Ms. Chen," Judge Martinez said, consulting the classified briefing materials that documented the scope of Jessica's intelligence activities, "you are charged with espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, money laundering, and systematic harassment of federal law enforcement personnel. How do you plead?" Jessica looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The confident real estate agent who had terrorized me while wearing my wedding dress transformed into someone who finally understood the magnitude of consequences that came with betraying the United States government. "Not guilty, Your Honor," her attorney said weakly, though the mountain of evidence suggested that the plea was more procedural than realistic. Federal prosecutor Amanda Torres rose with the confidence of someone presenting a case that had been building for months through coordinated intelligence gathering and surveillance operations. Your Honor, the defendant systematically infiltrated FBI director families, gathered classified intelligence, and transmitted sensitive information to foreign adversaries while using family relationships to maintain access and credibility. Agent Walsh was called as the first witness, her testimony revealing the scope of Jessica's operation in ways that made my personal trauma seem like a small part of a much larger national security threat. Your Honor, Ms. Chen contacted 17 different FBI families over 18 months, using her real estate credentials to ask detailed questions about residential security, family schedules, and vulnerability assessments, Agent Walsh testified. She was building comprehensive intelligence profiles on federal law enforcement leadership for foreign buyers. The evidence was staggering in its scope and sophistication. Jessica hadn't just been tormenting me out of sibling rivalry, she had been conducting systematic intelligence operations against multiple FBI families, using her apparent concern for family welfare to gather information that could be used to target, compromise, or eliminate federal law enforcement leadership. Furthermore, Agent Walsh continued, financial analysis of the defendant's accounts shows payments totaling $847,000 from shell companies linked to foreign intelligence services. Ms. Chen was being compensated at professional espionage rates for the intelligence she gathered about FBI families. When I took the witness stand, holding photographs of Jessica wearing my wedding dress while live-streaming her mockery of my miscarriages, the personal cruelty felt even more devastating in the context of its national security implications. Mrs. Thompson, Prosecutor Torres said gently, please describe how your sister used your fertility struggles to maintain access to your home and gather intelligence about FBI operations. She weaponized my grief, I said, looking directly at Jessica, who finally had the decency to appear ashamed. Every moment of vulnerability, every conversation about my miscarriages, every time I needed family support, she was documenting everything for foreign intelligence services. The manipulation had been expertly crafted, using my most private pain as cover for systematic intelligence gathering that threatened not just my family, but the entire federal law enforcement apparatus that protected American national security. She photographed classified documents, recorded conversations about ongoing investigations, and used my wedding dress as a prop in psychological warfare designed to break my effectiveness as a federal prosecutor, I continued. Jessica turned family relationships into weapons against the United States government. Jessica's attorney attempted to cross-examine me, suggesting that family conflict had been misinterpreted as espionage, but her questions fell flat against recorded conversations, financial evidence, and digital forensics that proved systematic intelligence gathering rather than personal animosity. The most damaging testimony came from Dr. Martinez, the FBI psychologist, who explained Jessica's tactics within the context of foreign intelligence training and psychological operations designed to destabilize American law enforcement families. The defendant's behavior follows documented patterns used by hostile foreign services to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities in federal law enforcement personnel, Dr. Martinez testified. The systematic nature of her approach, the sophisticated psychological manipulation, and the financial compensation all indicate professional espionage training rather than family dysfunction. When Jessica finally took the stand in her own defense, her testimony revealed the depth of her betrayal and the calculated nature of her intelligence-gathering activities. I was initially approached by people I thought were legitimate business contacts interested in real estate opportunities in high-security neighborhoods, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face in what appeared to be genuine remorse. They offered significant compensation for information about federal law enforcement residential patterns. At what point did you realize you were working for foreign intelligence services? Prosecutor Torres asked. Jessica's voice broke as she answered. When they asked me to use Catherine's fertility struggles to maintain access to classified information. They coached me on psychological pressure techniques that would keep her dependent on family support, while gathering intelligence about FBI operations. Judge Martinez studied Jessica with the expression of someone who had seen the worst kinds of betrayal in federal court. Ms. Chen, you systematically exploited your sister's grief over pregnancy loss to gather intelligence for foreign adversaries. That represents a level of personal cruelty compounded by treason that demands the most severe consequences available under federal law. The gavel came down with the weight of national justice, and Judge Martinez's words echoed through the secure federal courthouse like a declaration that treason against American families would face the absolute consequences of federal law. Jessica Chen, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, and systematic targeting of federal law enforcement families. You will serve your sentence in maximum security isolation, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. I watched my sister led away in shackles, the woman who had worn my wedding dress to mock my miscarriages now disappearing into the federal prison system, where her intelligence-gathering skills would serve no purpose except to count the decades until her potential release. Michael stood beside me, his hands steady on my shoulder, representing not just my husband's support, but the institutional power that had transformed my personal trauma into a federal case study in protecting law enforcement families. The months following Jessica's sentencing brought revelations that expanded our understanding of her intelligence operation far beyond what federal investigators had initially uncovered. Counterintelligence analysis revealed that she had been part of a sophisticated network targeting military and law enforcement families across the eastern seaboard, using family relationships to gather intelligence that threatened American national security at the highest levels. Agent Walsh visited our home with regular updates that transformed Jessica's attack on our family into part of a much larger victory for American counterintelligence operations. Catherine, your sister's arrest led to the identification and dismantling of 17 separate espionage cells operating against federal law enforcement families. Her intelligence gathering had been part of a coordinated foreign operation to map vulnerabilities in American homeland security leadership. The scope of the victory was staggering. What had felt like personal family cruelty had actually been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled an entire foreign intelligence network that had been operating undetected for years within American communities. Jessica's financial records led us to foreign handlers, communication networks, and operational plans that exposed systematic targeting of FBI, DEA, ATF, and military families. Agent Walsh continued. Catherine, your courage in reporting her behavior prevented intelligence breaches that could have compromised dozens of ongoing federal operations. 6 months later, I stood before the Senate Intelligence Committee, testifying about my experience as part of new legislation designed to protect federal law enforcement families from foreign intelligence targeting. My wedding dress, which had been returned after serving as evidence in Jessica's trial, hung safely in our closet again, though it now carried different meaning than it had on our wedding day. Senators, I told the committee, foreign adversaries understand that the strongest federal agents and prosecutors can be compromised through systematic attacks on their families. My sister's operation demonstrates how family relationships can be weaponized to gather intelligence and destabilize American law enforcement capabilities. The legislation I was supporting, called the Federal Family Protection Act, would create new security protocols for law enforcement families, enhanced background screening for individuals seeking access to federal personnel, and specialized support services for families targeted by foreign intelligence operations. Michael's career had been transformed rather than damaged by our experience with Jessica's espionage activities. His leadership during the counterintelligence operation had demonstrated crisis management skills that led to his appointment as Deputy Director of National Intelligence, overseeing coordination between federal agencies responsible for protecting American security interests. The President wants me to lead a new task force on domestic counterintelligence, Michael told me over dinner one evening 6 months after Jessica's sentencing. We're creating protocols to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations targeting federal families before they can gather meaningful intelligence. The most profound transformation was in my own sense of purpose and healing. The grief over my miscarriages, which Jessica had weaponized so effectively, had been recontextualized through my role in exposing and defeating a foreign intelligence operation. My fertility struggles, rather than representing personal failure, had become the vulnerability that Jessica exploited too aggressively, ultimately leading to her downfall and the protection of countless other American families. Dr. Martinez, the FBI psychologist who had helped me understand Jessica's manipulation tactics, visited regularly to discuss my recovery and my potential role in training other federal families to recognize intelligence targeting. Catherine, your experience has become a case study in recognizing and resisting psychological warfare against American law enforcement families, she explained. Your ability to maintain your professional effectiveness while under systematic attack has demonstrated resilience that can be taught to other federal personnel facing similar targeting. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica's attempt to destroy my effectiveness as a federal prosecutor had instead made me more valuable to American counterintelligence operations, connecting me with resources and opportunities that exceeded anything I'd imagined possible in my original career trajectory. As I prepared for bed each night, I would often look at my wedding dress hanging safely in our closet, no longer a symbol of violated sanctity, but a reminder of how love and institutional protection had transformed personal trauma into national security victory. Jessica had tried to use my most intimate grief as a weapon against American interests, but her cruelty had ultimately strengthened the very systems she'd been trying to undermine. Michael and I had resumed fertility treatments with new hope and different perspective. Whether or not we succeeded in having biological children, we had learned that family could be defined by chosen loyalty rather than genetic accident, by institutional commitment rather than blood relationship, by shared values rather than shared DNA. Jessica's betrayal had taught us that the most dangerous enemies often came disguised as family, but it had also revealed the power of chosen family, colleagues, institutions, and communities, united by common purpose rather than common ancestry, to protect and strengthen each other against threats that individual families couldn't face alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.